Welcome to the fourth installment of our short CFD video tutorials. In this video, we will take our project, our simple project, and give it a lot more intelligence. We will go and verify if the support ID a caller has entered is actually valid or not. We will work on the support option component in this video, where the support ID a caller enters will be verified against a database. If it is valid, the caller will be welcomed and the call forwarded to the support queue. If the support ID entered is invalid, the call will be forwarded to the sales option call flow component. Opening the support option component, we will see the call flow we created in our third video. We will enhance the valid input call flow to verify the support ID which has been entered. This will read out the support ID entered, then contact the database the support IDs are stored in to verify if it is a valid option. Let's go and configure that now. Underneath the ID verification prompt, I will drag a database access component from the Application Tools section. I will rename it to Support ID Lookup. Double-click to configure it. Now let's configure the database details that the CFD will connect to and obtain the support ID. I'm using a PostgreSQL server, so I will select that as the database type. Now we will enter the individual properties of the database. First, we will enter the database server IP. The database name is company. The username to connect to the database is Postgres. And then the password. The statement type will be set to scalar to return a single value. In this case, the number of database entries the support ID entered matches. Before we write the SQL statement which will go and retrieve the value of the support ID entered from the database, we will define the parameter we will use. I will use ID as the name of the parameter. Pressing the three-dot button next to the value field opens the expression editor, just like we saw from the third video, with the reading out of the entered ID. We will get the ID parameter, which is the support ID entered by the user. Now we will go and create the SQL statement to see if a database entry exists with the support ID. Select count and the star returns the number of database entries that match the search criteria. Then we add from customers to query the customers table. And finally using where the ID parameter is. So what is the ID parameter? I will now use a placeholder to get the value of the parameter below and put it into the SQL statement. We will receive a response from the database. Now, we will need to establish a condition which will define what will happen when a match is found in the database and what will happen when no matches are found. We will receive a response from the database. We will need to establish a condition which will define what will happen when the response from the database is valid or invalid. I must mention that we already have two call flows in this component for valid and invalid input. That input is whether a caller has entered a 4-digit ID. The condition that we will create now is to check that the 4-digit ID is actually a valid ID which is present in the system. From the call flow section, I will drag the create a condition component to just underneath the database access component. This will be called ID validity. The first condition is a valid ID entry. I will rename the first condition valid ID. Let's configure the condition to be met. So this is considered a valid ID, meaning that this ID is in the database. This is done by double-clicking the valid ID condition. The function button will be used to create the condition. Assuming each support ID is unique in our database, we want the response of the database query to be 1, meaning that the ID which was entered is present. So from our previous SQL statement, we should receive a response of 1, since we used the select count statement. I will go to the inbuilt functions and select the Boolean function of equal and drag it to my expression builder. This compares if the two values provided are equal to each other. Next, going to the Variables tab, I will select my support ID lookup scalar result and also drag this to the expression builder. A valid ID in the database would return a scalar result of 1, so this will be entered as a constant variable, which is an integer number of 1. We will make this even more interesting to the caller now by also returning and reading out the name of the caller as well, which corresponds to the support ID. Adding another database access component to look up the name of the user based on the support ID entered will be required. Let's drag that component to the valid ID condition. I will rename it to user's name lookup. Again, the database configuration will be required. This time the statement type will be set to query to return a row from the database using the select statement. In the parameters, we will enter the value of the ID to be the authentication ID entered, just like we did earlier. I will just write it down now. Now let's add the statement to select the name from the row of the customers table based on the ID. Again, the placeholder will be used to get the value of the authentication ID entered. As we now have the value of the name, we will read it back to the caller. I will move the existing call flow components which we previously had to transfer the call to support to the new condition call flow. I will edit the prompt for the transferring of the call to support to now also read back the name of the caller. The old prompt which we had pre-recorded way back in the first video will now be scrapped and replaced with a text-to-speech prompt which says welcome. I will add a second prompt now which will return the value of the name assigned to the user ID and read it out. Again, using the function key, I will use an inbuilt function object this time. I will use the getTableCellValue object. This function allows us to extract a single value from a list, like the value our SQL statement will return. Drag this to the expression builder. Going to the variables, I will get the query result of the user's name lookup. This will give us the actual SQL query result. Now we want to get the value from the first column, so we will use a constant integer number variable to define the column number. This will be set to 0 to get the first column. We will repeat this for the row number. Setting this to 0 will get the first row returned. As we are expecting only one result, this will give us the name of the person which corresponds to the ID. As you can see, this prompt is not in quotation marks, so it will actually give us the result as speech and will not read out specific text. The third prompt in this sequence will mention the transferring of the call to support. So that wraps up the configuration of a valid ID being entered. For the invalid ID condition now, we will transfer the call to sales. If a valid ID is not found, the second condition's flow will now be used. First of all, let's rename this to invalid ID. I will create an audio prompt which will read out that the ID has not been found. I will drag yet another sales option component from our user-defined components to the invalid ID condition call flow. Now all that remains is to test this call flow. But before we do, let's build the project. So after we've built the project, we will go and import that into the call flow apps. And I'll go to my inbound rule and modify this to reflect to the new call flow. So let's go and test this now.
Welcome to our company. Press 1 for technical support. Press 2 for sales.
I'll press 1 for technical support.
Please enter your 4-digit support
So I'm going
ID.
to pause the call for a bit here. On screen, you can see the database entries we have in the database we connected to earlier. I'm going to enter one of the 4-digit IDs, and the call flow will read out the 4-digit ID as well as the name. Now back to our call. Okay, I'll enter that ID.
The support ID you have entered is 4321. Welcome, Nicholas. Your call will now be transferred to support.
And the call gets transferred to technical support. So what we saw in this call flow is that I entered a 4-digit ID. Based on the database you saw on the screen, we received the result and it read out my name as well. Hope you enjoyed this 4th video. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.